Recently, Sir Lloyd Gearing delivered a lecture at the Readers and Writers Festival in Auckland, provocatively titled, "How Humans Made God." Whether we like Lloyd's views or not, I think they're worth considering. And this morning I want to give a brief synopsis of that lecture and a response. Lloyd begins by paying tribute to Ludwig Feuerbach, who lived from 1802 to 1874. He was a disciple of Hegel's, and it was Feuerbach who first asserted that humans made God. Hegel, his mentor, understood reality to be a dynamic process in which the physical world emanated out of spirit or mind. This, of course, reflects the biblical view of creation, of God or spirit making physical matter. But the real truth, said Feuerbach, is that spirit or mind emanated out of physical matter. It was the other way round. The human mind developed out of the physical body and brain, and God is an idea of the human mind. Feuerbach wrote some 20 years before Darwin. Lloyd then moves on to talk about the evolution of human language, from which arose the idea of God. Language evolved from a primitive means of communication to a means of constructing a thought world. As children, we give names to familiar objects, thereby transforming something unknown into known and making it our possession. Well, the ancients did much the same. But what could not be seen, but only felt, such as wind and breath in Latin is spiritus, it remained mysterious and could not be wholly possessed. The primitive mind imagined itself surrounded by an invisible spiritual world in which breath and wind were the tangible proof. To the ancients, it seemed self-evident that all natural events, like the weather today, storms, etc., were caused by invisible spirits, into whom the ancients projected their own personal experience. By giving these spirits names, the gods came into being. In our oldest written records, we find gods well established, and humans feeling themselves at their mercy. So in Mesopotamia, we get Tiamat and Marduk. In Greece, Zeus and Apollo, and in Rome, Jupiter and Venus, to mention just a few of the gods. The gods were created by humans to identify and explain natural phenomena. Humans had to respect and obey these gods if they wished to survive. Well, the cultural age of the gods lasted a very long time. Then in the axial period, around 500 BCE, in 5 or 6 different places, stretching all the way from Greece to China, the gods came to be radically questioned, modified, and abandoned. The many gods of polytheism had evolved in some places into what's called henotheism. This is where you have an exclusive god for your tribe, but you acknowledge the reality of other gods in other tribes. So it evolved from polytheism to henotheism, and then in this axial period to monotheism. For the Jewish people, this birth of God, as Lloyd calls it, happened during a period of great cultural crisis, namely the Babylonian exile. Far from their homeland, in fear of losing their heritage and faith, the Jews reinterpreted their own traditions to make sense of what they were encountering and to ensure their own survival. The Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, was the result. The Torah asserted that everything could be traced back to one source that it called God. The Jews had gone into exile in Babylon as henotheists and returned years later to their homeland as monotheists. Lloyd concludes this section of his lecture by asserting that perhaps God was the most important concept that ever came to birth in the evolving world of human thought. In a metaphorical sense, God did create the world, a centre, a focal point to which everything else could be related. This centralizing idea was the foundation stone for both Christianity and Islam. In Western culture, it's only since the 1800s, the time of Hegel, Feuerbach and Darwin, that we've been able to appreciate that we live in a changing and evolving universe. We are much more aware in the West today that our language and ideas, knowledge, even science, is always changing. We're also aware now of the capacity of the human mind to project itself out onto something external. And this is accepted as a common psychological mechanism. It explains why many fervent believers in a personal God so often claim that they know precisely what God is thinking and planning. It's because they are unconsciously projecting onto God what they themselves inwardly think and aspire to. Thus, there's a close correlation between a person's thoughts and the way God is conceived. Feuerbach came to realize that we project onto God all the values we hold dear, like love, compassion, justice, and all the abilities we'd like to possess, like power, knowledge, insight. The study of God, Feuerbach concludes, is the study of our highest values and aspirations. Lloyd posits that today it is the theism, the God, if you like, in monotheism that is dying. The more religion promotes an all-powerful deity, the more many modern people in the West perceive from the events around them a deity that is powerless and thus lacking credibility. The idea of God, says Lloyd, has served us well as a symbol affirming the unity of the universe. Indeed, the basic premise of all scientific inquiry is that natural phenomena operate in a rational and comprehensible way. This arose from the prior conviction that the whole world had been created by a superintelligence called God. Lloyd concludes that in this time of the death of theism, we humans in the West find that we're on our own in a tiny planet in an unfeeling universe that has no interest in us whatsoever. It's a bit grim. Equipped only with the tools of science, we must now shoulder responsibilities for our future that we once attributed to God. We now have to play the role of God. Nearly 200 years ago, Feuerbach argued that the death of theism had been the goal of Christianity from the beginning. The doctrine of the incarnation, in a simplistic form, as God coming down to earth and being incarnated in Jesus. In a more sophisticated form, it says that the heavenly God that humans projected their values upon was enfleshed not just in Jesus, but in all humanity. Feuerbach says Christianity is good news because it opens the way for humankind to live full lives by learning how to embody its own highest values. The central Christian symbol, the cross, symbolized the death of God, and this was the death that left the heavenly throne empty. At about this point, Lloyd concluded the Michael King lecture. Well, I find much truth in what Lloyd says about the evolution of human language, our thoughts and our gods. There is also much truth in the power of projection, of wanting to shape our deities in our own image with some superpowers added. The idea of God as a unifying symbol is interesting, and one wonders what Lloyd thinks might take its place. Science? Knowledge? Humanity? Of course, deifying science, knowledge, or humanity brings its own problems. As those of you who have listened to me for many years realize, although I try to avoid labels, I am what could be called a non-theist. By that term, I want to discard the theistic being who masquerades as an all-powerful, all-loving, all-knowing Superman. However, that does not mean that I discard the notion of God, nor see God, like Lloyd, as just a unitary symbol for the best of humanity's values. Though always with a degree of skeptical self-critique, I want to claim that my experiences, our experiences of sacredness, particularly known in the power of mutual loving relationships, transcends the boundaries of my mind, our minds, and probably the boundaries of knowledge and science. I want to claim that there is some form of sacred presence, which I experience most profoundly as compassion, which the early Christians experienced in Jesus and in their community after his death. And this sacred presence I would name as God. It's often easier to name what I believe God is not than to struggle to name what God is. However, to follow Lloyd and limit God to simply a unifying symbol created by our minds is too reductionist for me. Instead, I want a doctrine of God that is big, that embraces wonder and mystery, the power of mutual love, the spirit of joy and laughter, and the evolution, revolution of creative change.